But yeah, we did crabs yesterday.
Nice, dude. I haven't had
So we're back
crabs
for
in
a
so
day.
long.
I mean, it was good. I fucking love eating crabs.
Yeah.
And I'll just like accept all of the cuts on my hands for the next several days. And the
Yeah.
smell of Old Bay that just doesn't wash off, you
Yeah.
know? It just sticks around. But honestly, like, he crushed it. I don't know. It took a fucking Frenchman to show me how to eat crabs like a civilized person.
Oh, really? A Frenchman showing up
Oh,
a
yeah.
Marylander?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, he was like, okay, how do I pull this bad boy apart, basically. Once he knew how, he, like, had a tiny fork, and he was, like, very efficient and very clean.
Yeah.
I was just, like, making a fucking mess, cutting my hands everywhere. He was like, I thought this was gonna be, like, chaos, but, it was actually great. Yeah.
Yeah. That is
It's
surprising.
because you're so fucking civilized.
Shit, dude. I knew people from like Pennsylvania that when they came down or something and went to a crab feast, they were like, what do I do?
Dude, that's how I
They were
felt. I
like
mean,
eating shells and shit.
the first time I went to my husband's family's house for crabs, I looked at him like, I don't fucking know. Like, you gotta,
Really?
like, this is not something that I did with my family.
You guys didn't
Like,
eat crabs growing up in Maryland?
not like, I mean, we would get like crab legs and like, we were more of like crab cake people,
Yeah.
but we didn't usually get like whole
Like the
crabs.
steamed, yeah.
Yeah. Like covered in Old Bay and shit. And, that's not my mom's favorite thing anyway. But, always like crabs, always like crab legs, always like crab cakes, all that shit. But yeah, I did not know how to break a crab apart because I probably had never actually done that in my life. Like, I had opened crab
Damn.
legs, but I'd never, like, fucking broke open a crab.
Right. Clean the
And so I was
intestines out.
fucking, yeah, I was freaking out, embarrassed. Like, I'm from here and I have no idea what I'm doing. And it's like they're, a Maryland family. Like, they're all
Yeah. Right.
sort of born and raised here, and my family was not.
Yeah, but you
So,
were. That's like, yeah,
yeah,
my
I
family
was.
was.
But, like, they weren't. So, like, it wasn't, uh, like, I don't think it was, like, that important to them when I was growing up, just because it wasn't like part of their growing up experience.
Yeah. That's what I said. I just assumed everybody did because, like, when I was like 7, 8, my grandfather taught me how to do all crab related shit. Like, catch them, steam them, hold them,
That's the thing though, like
clean them. Yeah.
we've always had mallets and shit, so we must have done it,
It's like you must have
and I
had,
just don't
yeah.
remember.
Plus, in like Maryland, mallets and stuff like that. Listeners that don't know or aren't familiar with like Maryland kind of crab feast as we're describing them right now, it's like if I think it's just like something people give as like gifts. Like it's just like, oh, here's a crab mallet, like a little stupid like gift shop like crab
Yeah,
mallet
that's
that
what they're
says like
bringing back
McCormick.
to.
Yeah,
They're bringing some back for gifts,
right.
but yeah, and like when you get them, it's like
That was a
it was
weird thing when I
good.
lived in Louisiana because it was like they did like stuff like crab feasts with like shellfish and stuff like. But one, they always
Yeah.
boiled them, which being a Maryland
Yeah, I
guy,
was
I
gonna
was
say
like,
they were doing like a boil.
yeah,
Yeah.
steaming is my like shrimp, crab, all that. I prefer it steamed just because I guess that's what I grew up with. But then boil's
Yeah.
fine, but you got to season the shit out of the water because
Yeah.
otherwise you're boiling all the flavor out. And then like there's not like I don't know. It was I learned how to eat different kind of shellfish for it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. My dad found some deal that was like get 2 dozen, get a dozen free.
Right.
And my parents are not going to eat the leftovers, so now I have like almost a dozen crabs sitting in my fridge that I guess
Nice.
I'm gonna figure out eating tonight,
Oh yeah.
even though like my hands are all fucked up.
You can either eat them cold or just pick them clean and then use the meat in like a pasta or something or like
Yeah,
a,
that's what I was thinking. But either way, like I gotta deal with it,
yeah.
or I gotta freeze them. Like I gotta figure out what to do with them. I think I just like have a bag of corn, like a bunch of
Nice.
ears of corn.
Nice.
It just feels so. Just like, oh my god, does this fit in my fridge?
Nice.
Speaking of sea animals.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Fucking whale. Moby Dick.
Pasty whale.
Pasty whale, the white whale, a racist whale, dude, is what, what it is.
Yeah, it's a racist as shit whale.
Yeah, dude. Alright, so yeah, I guess we'll get to it here. Alright, well, this is another episode of Heavy Board. I'm Andrew Wittstadt.
I'm a fucking whale.
And today we're doing Herman Melville's classic Moby Dick. Moby Dick. Housekeeping real quick, because I always forget to mention this. I'm going to try to do it in the beginning of these next couple episodes. We are looking for workshop horror stories. If you were in any type of art workshop where, you know, you're sitting around a room and people say things about your work, we want to know about the bad things that happened. Send us an email at heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. We'd like to start a segment where we go into that. That'll be a lot of fun and commiserate with you guys, all the listeners out there. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/heavyboard. For just a couple bucks a month, you get access to our entire catalog. If you can't afford that, you don't want to do that, you can support us by subscribing on various platforms, whichever one you choose. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can support us that way. Share it online. Leave us a 5-star review. Plenty of ways to support us that don't involve spending money. So have at it, guys. Send us your workshop horror stories again at heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. And that's housekeeping. All right. Moby Dick. And like I took a couple notes on this. Like I don't have as many notes on this one as I do for some of the other ones, but mainly because I found this book hard to read. I found it boring.
Well, it takes a lot of effort to read for sure, and I, as you know, was like struggling to get through it because I was just drowning in other work. But yeah, I'm in the same boat.
It's slow going, and we talked about this on Virginia Woolf episode where like because part of it being slow, I mean, one, this is a long book, right? But like the prose styling takes a while to read because it's a lot of modified on top of modified sentences where you have strained thoughts that pop in, that pop in, that pop in, and then, you know, throughout the whole sentence type thing. So in my brain, at least, like that takes a little bit of time. Like that takes a little bit of time to like
Well, yeah, and the
read through
prose
all
is
that.
also like kind of beautiful. Like whether or not we like it before
Right.
we even get there, I thought that the prose was like beautiful, and it has a lot of moments that, whether or not I cared about what was happening in the book, I thought that there were moments that were just so beautifully written and almost like, you know, just sounded like poems to me.
Yeah, well, I want to talk
But
about
that makes it really, it's really dense to get through. And because, you know, we were also pushing through it, we are not going to be able to parse it at like the level that we might do with other books. Not to say that we do with all of them, but there's so much in this book that you can explore that we will not.
This is Heavy Board, bitch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you brought
Honestly,
that up,
you know, I found, yeah.
with like the
Good.
prosy kind of style, because when I was listening to some Bloom lectures on this, he claims that it's more a prose poem than it is a novel. Moby Dick.
Oh,
is
yeah.
what he claims. I have a few questions
It's-
about that, like we get to at some point, but
I mean, there are moments that like the ends of chapters straight up rhyme.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and it was, but like really well done, like really beautifully written.
And it made me think of, like I said, I brought up
However
Virginia Woolf.
boring.
Sorry. What'd you say?
However, I was just saying, like, however boring it is,
Yeah.
beautifully written.
And the reason I brought up Virginia Woolf, and honestly, I got a Joyce vibe too, because I just a couple months ago went through all of Joyce's works, and obviously Woolf and Joyce are much later than you know, about like 50 years after this book, like is when they were starting to publish. But you can feel it, right? Like they were clearly very influenced by Melville, or just that kind of style of writing from that time in like the 19th century. uh, the prose stylists that were like the masters of the craft at the time. Like there really is no comparison, as Sophie was saying. There's just yeah, the sentences are so complex and so beautiful, and like that you really have to admire it for that, you know. And we'll get to like how's this in the canon, where we think it is in the canon, why is it so like praised in the canon. Culturally, this is so ingrained into us that I mean, people just I was watching fucking MasterChef, dude, because I love Gordon Ramsay, you know. So I'll watch all the Gordon Ramsay shows where he yells at people for like their bad dishes. I love it. But like somebody, it was like a guest judge or something, some big chef came in and she said like, "Oh, you know what my white whale is?" Like that's, and I was just like, we had just finished reading Moby Dick here for this pod, and I was like, it's everywhere. Like it is so ingrained into the culture. People just, oh my, people that have never read this book just know what it's about. They know the white whale references. They know how to use it in a sentence, like white whale, my white whale, like the Ahab references. Everybody uses these like all the time. It's so ingrained into our culture now that like, and that, I mean, we'll get more in depth to this as we kind of move along, but like, I'm just very fascinated by that. Like the cultural impact of a book that I read and didn't quite have the same reaction that I would like when I read like a Shakespeare or something, you know, like there's just something like, not that like, you know, I'm going to be, oh, it shouldn't be in the canon or something, or we shouldn't hold it up as highly as we do. Like, I don't really care about stuff like that, but it's, I didn't get the same kind of in awe feeling that I get when I read some of what we call, you know, some of the older books that we hold up as the greatest or great things that were written before we were born. It's like Shakespeare, some of the Wharton stuff I read, again, Wharton's, you know, like 50 years later here, Twain, some of this stuff that I, you know, you read from this similar time period, and it just didn't hit me as deeply as that. And, you know, that's just a personal thing, right? Somebody could read this, like Bloom calls it a masterpiece, and that lecture I watched very eloquently, as always. Bloom is very eloquent, like praised the book, made me question, be like, oh, why do I not get the same feeling that he did from this? Like, why was I more bored? Like,
yeah, I think I would feel much more engaged if I were breaking it up into like 3 sections and like having a discussion about it that's led by someone who really knows their shit better than I do. I mean, especially for a book that leans so heavily on like religious tropes, right? Like that's something that Bloom is really steeped in. And something that he can speak really easily to. Right. And I think having that kind of lens as you're reading, even if you don't have that knowledge, so like having someone there who's like guiding your discussion is really helpful. So like if you don't read this book in a class with like a good teacher, I can see why so many people end up not reading it, you know, without that. Because it is hard. It's hard. There's so much to try to wrap your head around in every fucking sentence that you will miss a lot reading it on your own. That doesn't mean you shouldn't read it, you know. There were still parts I really enjoyed in the absence of some kind of guide. There were parts where I had to spend a lot of time looking things up, you know, and then there were a lot of parts where I just gave up looking things up because I was just trying to get through this lengthy book.
Yeah. And it is like, it's a task. Like, unless you are somebody, if you're reading this in a class or a grad program or some grad school or something like that, it is a task. Like, this isn't a book that you can read in a couple days and move on. Like, it took me a couple weeks, took Sophie a few weeks.
Way too long.
and it is like, it's not casual reading, I guess is what we're trying to say. Like, it's not something that you can just pick up and or maybe you can, you know, we don't want to discourage anybody from reading, the few people that still read.
I mean, like shit, you might be a great reader and way smarter than me, in which case go for it. And again, like, you should read it. It's great to, you know, have that in your wheelhouse, but yeah, it's not something that I would rush your reading of. Do not do what I did.
And like you said, like it's great to have read. Like that's the main reason I put it on this list, and the main reason I wanted to purchase and own a copy and read it, because I had never had to read it. I had never been assigned it in a class, and it's so ingrained to the culture, to our history, to every type of pop culture reference and things like that. Like it's still being like, this book is 150 years old plus, so it's not even more than that, right? It's like 170 years old now, and we still reference it. We still reference the white whale, i.e. the big desire, the thing that we can't get that we all want type thing. So it's still used in that type of metaphor. So I was like, you know what? Like, I'm gonna fucking read this. Like, I want to read this book, and just to be like, all right, I've read it. Like, everybody else just kind of pretends to read this, or you don't even need to because it's so ingrained in the culture. You already know the plot, basically, right? Like, you know the plot, not like all the minor details and all that stuff. Maybe not names, but like, you know the general idea. And I maybe our generate like the Page Master. You know what I'm talking about? That Macaulay Culkin movie in the '90s.
Oh,
It's like half animated, and you know, Moby Dick is one of the big storylines in that. So like, I think a lot of my knowledge of it came from that, maybe like being like a '90s kid and like watching that movie. That was one of my favorite movies as a kid, not just because it was
Macaulay
books.
Culkin really freaked me out as a kid.
Yeah, it was just fun.
I kind of avoided his shit.
Yeah. Page Master, underrated if you haven't go seen it. Is it a Disney movie?
Maybe.
I don't even know.
I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
Like I said, he freaked me out as a kid, so I kind of avoided him. He was just like pale, you know?
Macaulay Culkin, he looks the same as he did then, so now he's just like a permanently weird looking adult, like heroin chic forever.
Yeah.
All right, we haven't even gotten to the books yet, but yeah, my version, we did read slightly different version of this, although I think the texts are like kind of the original authoritative texts, because they're in my introduction, which is the Wordsworth Classics. Listeners have heard me say this before. If you're looking for just like a cheap copy paperback with a authoritative text, like Wordsworth Classics is the way to go. Like it's a couple bucks and you get a nice, you know, not great bound book or anything. It's just a little cheap paperback, but like it's a good way, if you're broke as fuck like we are, to be able to like enjoy and own classic text. So the page numbers might be a little bit off with ours. What version did you have, Soph?
Yeah, I have the Penguin Classics edition.
Penguin Classics, same thing, but usually just a little bit more pricey. Although I think you got yours. Did you get yours used?
But mine was, I didn't pay for this one because it was my sister's.
Oh,
so.
Nice. The best way to get books when they're just given to you for free.
Yeah. But, you know, maybe you can hit some free little libraries around your town. If you live in a semi-affluent area, you might find a copy of Moby Dick.
Or you just go to your local library. Yeah.
Or you can go to a library, but I live in a pretty affluent area of the city I live in. And there are little libraries all over the place, so I try to hit those once in a while.
When did that become a thing? Like these little kind of fake libraries that people put out, like a birdhouse with books in it. And
I mean, yeah, I fucking love it, dude.
Really?
It's been great. I mean, like,
I've never actually encountered one in real life, but like I see posts go viral all the time on like book Twitter.
Oh god, they're all over my parents' neighborhood, so we've donated a lot of books that they were getting rid of, and like, I mean, that's how I just got a free copy of fucking what is it? The Goldfinch, Donna Tartt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've gotten a bunch of books that like I'm excited to have. And some that are like in really good condition, and some that are new and like that, you know, would be like $14 to get used at this point because that's how new they are.
There is this.
I mean, honestly, like there are books that like I'm kind of coming to terms with the idea of like letting go of because I'm a hoarder, and I think like I could probably give some of these away.
Yeah, it is a strange phenomenon here. Like I like the idea of libraries and like, you know, knowledge for everybody type thing and these vast archives. But then I always kind of struck with like the kind of, you know, in this world, like in our kind of circles, and like everybody's always like, oh, I'm too broke to like buy books or buy this journal or subscribe to this journal or subscribe to this podcast, listeners, all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, yeah, man, but like somebody's got to support it. Like, I mean, if you like
Yeah.
books, like, you want books to keep existing, well, like, you need to buy them. Like, so, you know, what do they call it? Like, literary citizenship. Like, if you want journals, you like journals, like, you need to subscribe, like, the $20 a year and
Oh,
support
yeah,
it.
dude.
Like,
I mean,
it's-
there are journals that, like, if first of all, it would be awful for me. Like, I want to subscribe to like a few journals, but it would be bad for me because it would just be stacks and stacks of journals in my apartment that I would be like, am I ready to get rid of this? Oh, I haven't read this one yet.
And most journals are pretty
Yeah.
bad too. Like, even when you get them in
Yeah.
the mail, there's like one or two good things in there worth reading, and everything else I'm just like, oh my god, like rolling my eyes, kind of.
That's the other
yeah.
thing, because people mostly are gonna like, you know, people like us, for example, that like can't afford to be subscribers for a lot of journals, you know, and like that's maybe the nice thing about like certain submissions, like you do get a free round of their journal sometimes, like if you submit to a particular journal or magazine, or if you submit to one of their contests, and that's cool. But it is likely going to be, you know, the poetry magazine or something, right? It's going to be the biggest names, and not like the little guys that probably need the most support. But if we're being entirely honest, it's like those bigger names that are going to be most reliable in terms of the content that they put out. Even if it's like not the best, it's like easier to have some sense of who the editors are, right? They're easier to find. But yeah, that's not that important. But yeah, Moby Dick.
Yeah, man. So support if you like books, if you like literature, if you're aspiring writer, want to be in this world. Well, how do you expect people to buy books if you're not going to do it, kind of thing. So, yeah, we always encourage people to do that. Be good literary citizens. All right, but let's get to the fucking book here.
Yeah, I don't even have that many chapters that are like important to me. But the ones that are, I mean, but I don't remember. But the first part of the book, I found myself like really kind of invested for the first several chapters and like kind of interested. Although I was starting to get frustrated when I realized like this book is 99% narration, and for the first several chapters, it feels like no detail is left unspoken.
Yeah, I also enjoyed the first few chapters. It was around chapter 9. I started to get a little bit bored. I felt myself getting a little bit bored. But before that, even, dude, the Hawthorne inscription. What do we think? So he says in the beginning of this book, it was dedicated to Hawthorne. Hawthorne and Melville were friends. I think there's an archive of letters back and forth for people that are interested somewhere out there on the internet. I'm sure you can find it. In a token of my admiration for his genius, this book is inscribed to Nathaniel Hawthorne. What do we think of that?
Yeah, so I haven't read Nathaniel Hawthorne.
I don't think I have either.
So I think that's something that I would need to investigate further. Like, we have to get some Nathaniel Hawthorne on our list, see what that influence is about. But I imagine, I mean, you said I didn't look into it. You said they were friends, like they knew each other.
Yeah, it was in the introduction to my copy with Wordsworth. There's a nice introduction by, Keith Carradine, maybe. Is that his name?
I have Andrew Delbanco. Yeah, I was too short on time to really get deep into the introduction, so I just did not.
Oh no, the introduction is David Hurd. Sorry, in my edition. But yeah, whatever, you know, sometimes they'll get some scholar to do like a really detailed introduction. Parts of it were very boring to me, but that I found interesting. They were kind of friends, so no doubt Hawthorne had read some of this manuscript, probably gave notes, etc. So,
It's always interesting to me to see like what authors were like in conversation with each other, like in real life, not just like through their work, but you know, what circles they ran in is always interesting. I think that tends to be easier to see in retrospect, obviously, because, you know, I don't know if they were necessarily popular at their time. Do you know if they were famous when they were alive?
Melville was famous, and so was Hawthorne.
Yeah.
But, you know, the story goes is that Moby Dick was a flop.
Right.
And he wrote this apparently very quickly. He wrote this in about a year and a half, I think.
Jesus.
And it was during a time when I think he was very productive, and he wrote a couple other stuff. I haven't read much of Melville. I'll say this just for this, like, I'm not a big Melville guy. The things I've read of his, like Bartleby the Scrivener, everybody talks about in like literary circles. I had to read that for a class in undergrad, and maybe I should revisit it now, like a decade later. But I wasn't a fan of that one either. I'm just not a huge fan of Melville. I just, but again, like the teacher I had for that class, like loved Melville. So Bloom loves Melville. A lot of scholars like Melville,
Yeah.
but I don't. I'm not a big fan of his style. I don't know what it is. Something about it. But yeah, the very beginning we have the famous first line, "Call me Ishmael." Very first sentence, right? So if you're ever in a Jeopardy question, the first lines of text, "Call me Ishmael," very famous first line of a novel.
Yeah, and chances are you probably already knew that.
Yeah.
Oops.
Even if you haven't read
I
the
just-
book, you knew that probably, yeah.
Yeah. Very famous first line. I was really interested at obviously this first page. I was really still invested in this moment. Wasn't too tired yet. Was a nice break from work.
And Ishmael is, when I started reading these first couple chapters, one of my notes, it is funnier than I expected.
Yeah.
Ishmael is pretty humorous, particularly when he's on the land still, and not on the
Yeah.
boat. That humor goes away a little bit, I guess, and if we're supposed to take with that as like some type of, you know, things are more serious because they're on this boat, they could die at any minute type thing. But yeah, I didn't mind the first couple chapters when he meets Queequeg.
Yeah, so Queequeg, really endearing character, especially for like the first, I don't know, how far in would you say? Maybe like the first like quarter of the book
Yeah, the
is
first like
particularly endearing.
60 pages or so, and you start learning about like his kind of religion, and then like their friendship that they like blossom, and then him like getting put and like, and honestly when they're even on the ship, like Queequeg is like kind of a noble hero character, right? Like he's saving people
Yeah.
that have fallen overboard, risking his own life. What that scene where the guy slips into the whale, and then
Oh,
the
yeah, that was one of
pulleys
my...
give way, and the whale's sinking to the bottom with this guy inside of it, and Queequeg like dives in after him and saves him, like cuts the whale open as it's sinking to the bottom of the ocean. So, you
Yeah.
know, heroic type shit, like that's like hero type, like
Yeah, and he
thing.
becomes, you know, very quickly becomes like best buddies with Ishmael. And they decide like that they're going to try to go boating together, right? Like they're going to try to be on the same boat because he's just like in this, well, they meet at this like inn, right? Where there's a bunch of other like whaling guys that are all going to be looking to join.
various ships
Yeah.
that like take off from, because I guess it starts in Nantucket, right? Like they're on like the coast of New England in like whaling
They don't
towns.
start at Nantucket, but they're like they're close, right? They start somewhere.
like the New England whaling towns.
Yeah. I don't remember where it was, but yeah, they start somewhere near there and then make their way to Nantucket, and that's where they leave from.
Yeah, one thing I did notice, like, while reading this, and parts of this that were boring, I think the parts that were the most boring were, like I said, right around chapter 9, I start to get a little bit boring, and, like, I get the Jonah and the whale kind of setup that is happening throughout this, and they take on, Melville takes a lot of pages to set that up with, like, the sermon and stuff in chapter 9, the kind of, like, rogue priest that has this little chapel for
Yeah.
only, like, whalemen, the kind of people that go out on boats for years and then may or may not come back, kind of thing. So I get all that, but I was just like, it was just a tonal shift, I thought, because it was very funny and humorous with, like, Ishmael meeting Queequeg and then kind of discovering the kind of rough and tumble, like, men that work these fishing boats, and then, like, having to kind of find his place there, and then
Yeah,
it's
and
very
like the
humorous,
organization
almost,
of it,
almost
and,
anthropological, like in the humor kind of.
and who is sort of at the top of the chain of command, and who's sort of at the bottom, at least in terms of like how they get paid, all this stuff. There's this line, and toward the beginning, it's in the first chapter, I think, where he talks about not minding being ordered around by captains, and says, "Who ain't a slave? Tell me that. Well then, however the old sea captains may order me about, however they may thump and punch me about, I have the satisfaction of knowing that it is all right, that everybody else is one way or another served in as much the same way, either in a physical or metaphysical point of view, that is. And so the universal thump is passed round, and all hands should rub each other's shoulder blades and be content." That's also like a really funny sentence to me. And so the universal thump is passed round.
Yeah, that's why I highlighted the passage right after that. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor, because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas they never pay passengers a single penny that I ever heard of. On the contrary, passengers themselves must pay, and there is all the difference in the world between paying and being paid.
Yeah.
Like, it was very, like, humorous, and he's like, yeah, kind of in this town that he hadn't been in before, but he knows he wants to get on a ship. He's got some sailing experience, not so much whaling experience, but like sailing. They make that kind of clear. So, like, and then I just saw that.
That's the thing, right? He's never done a whaling voyage. He went as a merchant sailor.
Merchant
So he's on, like,
sailor. And I can't remember if there were, like, references to him, like, doing, like, small fishing, like, stuff that doesn't take as long, just, like, dropping nets, or I guess they did.
Or maybe, like,
nets,
isn't as dangerous, or as quite as dangerous as whaling. So, yeah, there is a lot throughout here that is, like, specifically just, like, about whaling and whale anatomy and how it works that we will probably not talk about. I mean, you will talk about it.
For what?
Those chapters, there are a lot of chapters that are just like about whaling. And by about whaling, I mean dive into like whale anatomy specifically, and like how you break the whale down, and the history of whaling.
Yeah, there's a lot
historical
of chapters.
References to whaling. Like there's so much of it.
There's a lot of chapters, and this is part of what makes it kind of a drag to read for me. There was a lot of chapters where it's just explaining whale anatomy, just explaining, processing whales, explaining ship anatomy, like how, like, the ropes and lines on a whale ship are tied together, and how you use them. And I guess that matters a little bit in the story, you could argue. Because
it does, because I had to skip some of these chapters, as we know, right? And there were moments where I was like confused and had to go back and look things up and like find the chapter where that was addressed and read a passage from it. So yeah, if like you were hard pressed and you would just like really wanted to know what the story of Moby Dick was, so here's the thing: you'll miss a lot of what the book actually is. But you could ostensibly read like the first several chapters and the last several chapters and have all of the book that involves most of the action.
Yeah.
but you will lose a lot.
Well, you could, yeah. I mean, we could cut those chapters down if we really wanted to. But it was informative in some ways, for me as I read through it. With like, I texted Sophie about this. I was like, damn, no wonder we stopped whaling. Like, not just because people were like, well, it's inhumane, but because we developed kerosene. Like, it's so crazy. I was like, God, like, no wonder. Like, as soon as we invented like something that other than whale oil for fuel, like processing crude oil and getting the kerosene, and that was what, 1860s, 1870s, when kerosene started to be used instead of like whale oil or stuff in like lamps and all that. And you know, for those that don't know, the Rockefeller family, right? Standard Oil, that was their first big thing. It wasn't gasoline, that didn't exist yet. It was kerosene, and gasoline was a byproduct of making kerosene and all that. And Vaseline, all this stuff, all came out of Standard Oil and their processing of crude oil. But yeah, that was kind of like, God, just so insane. Like the fact that, like, how you would catch a whale in the ocean.
I mean, it is like really fucking insane.
Catch
giant
this
fucking animal. Like,
dude,
I
this,
mean,
like,
when you think about the
2-ton
idea
whale.
that like they could chop off a head and a person could fall into it. Like, it's
Yeah.
just a totally obscene thing for us to think about.
That's what I mean, the 2-ton whale. And they do a good job of explaining this, like or Melville does with this, you know, in the scenes when they're harpooning the whales, and then the boats, you know, you harpoon the whale and it fucking drags the boat, like, because it's a 2-ton fish. I guess it's not technically a fish, right? Most whales.
Yeah.
But like 2-ton fucking animal that just starts dragging a little skiff boat full of like 10 men, like, through the ocean water till it gets too tired and bleeds out. Like, that's how you fucking catch a whale. Like, and then just drag it back, like tow it back, and then hang it up on the end of a ship so that it makes the ship swing to one side because it's so fucking heavy, and then cut it piece by piece.
Piece by piece. That's like the crazy part. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, some of what he was explaining with that was pretty wild. I also get lost in understanding, like, when is Ishmael the narrator the whole time? Or, like, it seems to switch, right? It switches back and forth between, like, a narrator and Ishmael.
Yeah, Bloom talks about that a little bit, and he talks about Ishmael as a narrator who, like, comes in at different points, and then sometimes he'll just disappear entirely. Like,
I mean, there's a part where the narrator, you know, literally says, I'm going to pass it over, basically, to Ishmael. I surrender to him now. You have to listen to him talk.
There are parts, particularly conversations between the Captain Ahab and the mates, where, like, you know, Ishmael isn't there. Like, he wouldn't be able to hear this, but we still get it type thing. So there are, like, the narrator is very flexible, which, you know, there are no hard and fast rules for this type of shit. So a writer could do that, and, you know, whatever. Like, you can, as long as it still works, you know, you can make the narrator come in and out. But
yeah, and it does, and it's difficult. Like, I mean, you know, I would say the further you get into this book, the more difficult it gets, and the more like the stranger it becomes. Like, there are a lot of like, isn't there a chapter that's just like it's sort of like a play?
yeah, and that's what made me think a little bit of Joyce and stuff, because Joyce was doing that in his last couple books.
It's really playful with genre.
Ulysses and you know, Finnegan's Wake, and, like, you know,
Yeah.
so you could see that they're, like, taking the play format and playing with it in a novel form, you know. Do you want to talk about the gay shit before we go to
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I guess. I mean, are we calling it gay shit? I don't think.
I was gonna
I
let
think
you
we've
take
determined
it.
it's not gay shit. It's just like a humorous way to talk about a male bond. So when gay shit. No. Yeah, so early on we're at the Sprouters Inn, I think. Yeah, the Sprouter Inn. So this is where Ishmael goes to find lodging while he's waiting to, you know, go I guess, travel to Nantucket, where he's going to try to get on a ship. He's looking for a place with a bunch of other, whaling types, because he's trying to get in with that crowd. He goes to this inn, and there isn't really a room for him except for one lodger who lives there, who has not returned and is described. Well, he's not quite described, I guess. He's basically, Ishmael is told by the innkeeper, well, you can, share a bed with this guy. And he tries to get all comfortable, and he's like, fuck that, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna try to get comfortable here in the bar room or something. Fails to do that, finally goes up to bed, and gets all freaked out when Queequeg enters, who is appears to him as what is described as a savage, I guess, right?
Yeah, he's from the islands around kind of the central and south, right, the Caribbean islands is what we know him as today. I forget where.
Yeah, I don't
from,
remember.
Anyway, the same idea, one of these kind of islands that are around the kind of Central America
But he's
area.
tattooed. They describe him as a cannibal.
Yeah, they say the culture is cannibal. And he's of royal blood from that island, and
that
is entitled to be an emperor there or something.
Tries to he sells men's heads.
That's
right?
that's what they say. It's kind of up in the air, but that's everybody's scared of him because he's a guy from an island where they cannibalize people in rituals and things like that. And this was the time, right? Keep in mind historical context. It's only been about 100, well, I guess 200 years at that point, where we would be kind of going back and forth from what we would call the New World, the islands, what we call the Caribbean now, kind of those islands that were all colonized by the British, the French, the Dutch, Spanish, all the European empires that came over and colonized those islands. So there's that aspect to it, so keep in mind the context. But yeah, they describe it as a savage thing because, again, it wasn't Western or whatever, eating other people and things like that. It's a big taboo, right, as we all know, in Western culture. But there are many cultures that still do that. I guess, yeah, not...
Why do
but
I
they
keep
are
thinking
usually
the
isolated.
Congo?
Yeah.
Oh, he has that idol.
Oh, right,
I don't know
yeah.
that that's where he's from, but he has this idol that's... yeah, so there's some illusion that maybe he's South American, maybe. Yeah, I don't remember. But either way, he is clearly a religious guy, not Christianity, which is kind of important in this book.
Yeah, and alienates a lot of the people in New England who were Christian or Presbyterian or some form of
or Quaker, right?
Yeah.
There's also the Quaker element.
Right. And
Which I
all
think
those
is,
were at odds with each other,
yeah.
right? You don't go to a Quaker
Yeah.
church if you're Episcopalian, and you don't go to that kind of thing. And that was much more important to people than it is today. Although I guess some people are still find that. But yeah, the stuff about because Sophie and I were texting about this, and Queequeg and Ishmael sharing a bed in there.
Well, because they make a point of being very funny about it and making some, jokes about this being two men laying in bed together, and Queequeg has his arm around Ishmael, and it's and he talks about how nice it is, and oh, it's almost you would think it was my wife that I was holding hands with right now, and it's really funny, and but there is this, I don't know, this sense of a real genuine bond between these guys. And there's this moment of this is still in the beginning of their relationship where they're not super good friends yet or anything, so they're just laying there together, they're sharing this bed. He's scared of Queequeg, right? Ishmael is scared of Queequeg, so he wakes up and he's kind of freaked out, and he's oh shit. But then Queequeg is he gets up, and he it's really funny. He goes, I think, under the bed to put his shoes on or something. he changes basically into clothes and then leaves the room so that Ishmael can change in privacy. And so like there's this, I don't know, there's this maybe playing with like, you know, some kind of like homosocial relationship, but it's not, you know, gay in any way. It's not like, it's not gay. I'm not. It's just, it's really tender and it's like funny, but it grows into something that is quickly becoming like, oh, these guys are like best friends now.
Yeah, the passage I highlighted is the last paragraph in chapter 10, where Ishmael says, "How it is I know not, but there is no place like a bed for confidential disclosures between friends. Man and wife, they say. There open the very bottom of their souls to each other, and some old couples often lie and chat over old times till nearly morning. Thus then, in our heart's honeymoon, lay I and Queequeg, a cozy, loving pair."
Yeah, they're so sweet.
Yeah, well, so yeah, like the gay, like, and I think this is the results of like a lot of the queer theory stuff that started, you know, like 30, 40 years ago, where a lot of people argue of the homosexuality and all that kind of stuff when all male bonding and camaraderie, according to, again, like the kind of orthodoxy of queer theory is, you know, queer and or gay type of, and it's just a misguided thing, I think, especially at a time when it was common for people to share beds like this because there weren't enough, right? There wasn't like a fucking mattress warehouse. You had to make the mattresses. If there weren't enough beds, you would sell them to people for half price or something to share a room, whatever it is. But yeah, we don't have to get into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's this whole passage where he says, you know, I began to be sensible of strange feelings. I felt a melting in me. No more my splintered heart and maddened hand were turned against the wolfish world. The soothing savage had redeemed it. There he sat, his very indifference speaking a nature in which there lurked no civilized hypocrisies or bland deceits. Wild he was, a very sight of sights to see. Yet I began to feel myself mysteriously drawn towards him. And those same things that would have repelled most others, they were the very magnets that thus drew me. I'll try a pagan friend, thought I, since Christian kindness has proved but hollow courtesy. I drew my bench near him, and made some friendly signs and hints, doing my best to talk with him meanwhile. At first he little noticed these advances, but presently, upon my referring to his last night's hospitalities, he made out to ask me whether we were again to be bedfellows. I told him yes, whereat I thought he looked pleased, perhaps a little complimented. So, like,
Yeah.
there, you know, there's also, like, a lot, again, of gesture toward religion, right? And sort of the ills of religion in particular, I would say.
Yeah, and when I watched that Bloom lecture, we'll link it here, listeners. It's on YouTube. If you just search like Harold Bloom Moby Dick, it'll pop up, and it's
Yeah,
like,
it's like the only one you'll probably
and
realistically
it
find.
was kind of towards the end of his life. He seemed very old in like the lecture when he was, you know, he wasn't as fast talking and stuff. He was much slower. But yeah, there's that. You could take a look at that. Those are good. That's good stuff. But yeah, I mean that. I don't know what the fuck I was gonna say.
The religion stuff.
Oh yeah, the religious stuff, and there's like that level of Ishmael at first is like trying to like convert, like teach, Queequeg, and then eventually like resigns to not, right, like starts to understand where Queequeg is coming from, and Bloom talks about this in the lecture. That's why I brought it up, because I know it doesn't seem like it by today's standards, right? Like he calls Queequeg a savage, things like that. People that would say are racist, you know, kind of tropes now by today's standards. Melville was, you know, a liberal essentially, like, and Bloom talks about that when he compares them to Whitman and stuff. Like they were American liberals at the time, basically. So they were very into freedom of religion and things like that, like all the religions coming together on this little island, on this whaling town, like everybody kind of side by side here. democracy type stuff. You know, Bloom goes really into that kind of. I wonder if that's where that comes from, but I think it would. Maybe not. I don't know enough about it. But yeah, so like that's what Melville was, right? Like that's what he was. And that, I guess Bloom says that's why this book is so important. You know, whatever you think of it, we like Harold Bloom on this podcast, so we respect what he thinks, even if we disagree with him. You know.
Yeah. You want to talk about Ahab?
Ahab. Yeah. Ahab
what you got next?
Ahab is like kind of doesn't really come in. He's like a mystery until we're on the actual boat, and even then it's a couple weeks until he like shows his face on deck. He's like hiding, and there's all these legends about him, and everybody's kind of scared of him a little bit, and he's like really hard-nosed and stuff.
And like thought of as like this crazy guy. Like, so we don't even meet him when Ishmael goes to this ship. They've made it to, you know, Nantucket. They're looking for a ship to get onto. I think they do it from Nantucket, right? I'm not going to find the exact page. And meets the two owners of the boat. And they basically, like, we get the sense of Ahab as, like, a total crazy guy. And there are these two owners of the boat, and one is, like, very sort of, like, loud and abrasive, and one is, like, a super religious, like, Quaker who's just, like, reading a Bible, I think.
Yeah, and if we want to get into it, like I said, in chapter 24 here, there's like a defense, almost like a defense of sailors and whaling, because whalers and sailors are looked down upon, right? Cursed like a sailor, etc. We have a lot of sayings that come out of that. Because if you were working that job, right, when it was literally life or death, you could die at any moment. Like the people that work those types of jobs, right, were lower class workers type thing. And I think, you know, in this sense, going along with like Bloom's theory of it, maybe it influenced me too much. We'll listen to that Bloom lecture, but it is kind of like a class defense, right? He's kind of going in there and trying to show the world this rich community and world of, you know, multicultural, like people from all over the world that come to the American and British shores and stuff and French shores to be whalers, kind of. You know, this, that it's a respectable profession, and chapter 24 basically spends pages, you know, arguing that we should respect sailors and whalers and the importance of it, and the oil, right? Like in chapter after that, he talks about like the oil is like a concoction of kings and queens, right? It's a very valuable commodity, and that, you know, if we didn't have sailors, well, then we wouldn't have any of the oil that we use for all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And well, it's interesting too, because he also, like, at the beginning, you know, Ishmael presents himself as something of like a melancholic type, right? Who is like kind of, I mean, like seemingly like just kind of bummed and like depressed, and talking about how, you know, like men infallibly will find water to, you know, as a way to help them like create meaning in their lives. I don't remember what he says. He refers to the magnetic virtue of the compass, and that men find water infallibly. That, you know, there's a lot of talk of Narcissus and, you know, how we see ourselves in water. And there's like, you know, some complicated imagery of like why we love the water, but also this, you know, I mean, I don't think anyone would try to be, or, you know, a desire to be Narcissus. Right?
Yeah. And then Ahab, yeah, he talks that when they introduce Ahab, it's like he comes up from the deck after like 2 weeks. Like,
it also doesn't bode well if he starts the book saying that they are like, you know, this character that falls into his own reflection. Right. But that's, you know, we already kind of know what the story is going to be.
And then on page, I think my version is page 134, is when Ahab finally mentions the white whale.
Give me 1 second. I gotta plug my laptop in.
It's when they like see that other ship, and that's when Ahab like comes up and is like talking to the, it's like they see that other ship, and then Ahab comes up from the lower decks and starts like talking to the captain of the other ship and be like, have you seen the white whale? And then like the guy's like, Moby Dick. Like all the captains kind of know this legend of this white whale that has like harpoons sticking out of its back, because every time somebody's tried to capture it, it's just killed them, or in Ahab's case, taken his leg. And then
Do you know what
eventually
chapter?
134 is the page, and then chapter 36, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, chapter 36.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah, but then that's just kind of, the first, and then like it's like 130 pages in. Most of the time we've just gotten Ishmael and Queequeg's relationship, and then we've gotten some like, education on whales, the process, how important it is to have these crews go out there and bring back the oil that we need to make life possible on the mainlands and all that all over the world. Whale oil was just basically the main source of fuel. And then they talk about like perfumes, right? That there are parts of it that they would take for perfumes, parts of it for eating, but mostly it was just melting down the fat to make oil, and like use that oil to burn fuel and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's this whole thing with Ahab. He has lost his leg to Moby Dick, so now he's like obsessed, right? It is Moby Dick that got his leg, right?
Yeah. But and then we start to get like stage directions type thing on chapter 37, page 139 in my version, where like in the beginning of the chapter there'll be like a chapter 37 sunset, and then we have kind of almost stage directions before it starts. The cabin by the stern windows, Ahab sitting alone and gazing out, like almost like it's like I got like almost like a Shakespeare vibe, because it's like you read a Shakespeare and it's just very sparse stage directions, something like that, very quietly.
And they're very, very short chapters, so you can almost think of them as like, some of them feel like monologues.
Yeah, they are, and no doubt he was inspired by Shakespeare. No doubt Melville was very well read of Shakespeare's stuff and loved it. But then right after that, page 140 in my version, like chapter 38, we start to get like other people's perspectives than just Ishmael. So like Ishmael starts to become a little bit more of just like we start to get the first mates and like them kind of questioning Ahab's, just not as bad as they do at the end there, where they're like kind of going to mutiny against him. But like they're starting to be like, well, hold on a minute, why are we headed in this direction? Like, we should be chasing like the oil, not this fucking white whale that like the captain's obsessed with, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of starts the whole like, all right, this is like planting the seed. And that's well done. Like I said, I wasn't a huge fan of this book. It kind of bored me at parts, but like I'm not going to sit here and be like, it shouldn't be in the canon, or it's too stupid and boring. No, that's not the point of reading something like this,
Yeah.
What was I going to say? Yeah, then we talked about the play set up. The Bible references are everywhere.
Yeah, so, and then, like, also, like, I mean, you talked about racism. We get to, in chapter 42, the whiteness of the whale, which I would say, like, is one of the big chapters in the book. It was, like, one of the ones that sort of, I woke up again as I was reading it and being like, oh, yeah, this seems important. Where maybe, like, not a lot of shit's happening, but it seems like maybe an important meditation in the book on, whiteness as a concept, whether in religion or in race, and the way it's like very conflicting and also like very fucked up.
You mean when he's talking about the kings on the islands?
Aside from those more obvious considerations touching Moby Dick, which could not but occasionally awaken in any man's soul some alarm, there was another thought, or rather vague, nameless horror concerning him, which at many times by its intensity completely overpowered all the rest, and yet so mystical and well nigh ineffable was it, that I almost despair of putting it in a comprehensible form. It is the whiteness of the whale that above all things appalled me. But how can I hope to explain myself here, and yet in some dim, random way explain myself I must, else all these chapters might be naught.
And you like the terms of like the whiteness is like in terms of like the symbolic use of the color white,
Yeah.
in terms of like purity,
Yeah.
wedding dresses, kind of the pagan traditions and Christian traditions that like make
Greek mythologies,
right.
but then also the way it's used to dictate who sits where in society.
Right. The jewels, he talks about pearls, he talks about things, but then he talks about it in the context of it being haunting in some way. I mean, yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, like, are we going to deny that, like, pretty much everybody alive at that time was
Well, it's
fucking
interesting
racist?
that I mean, he also
course they were,
describes
yeah.
the whiteness as a thing that above all horrifies him, right? It's the
Right.
most horrible thing about the whale, not how large and obscene and like powerful it is, but that it is the white whale.
And then he talks about the tigers, polar bears, like all the animals that we know that are kind of fierce.
Well, he says, what is it that the albino man so peculiarly repels and often shocks the eye, as that sometimes he is loathed by his own kith and kin? Is it that whiteness which invests him, a thing expressed by the name he bears?
Right.
The albino is as well made as other men, has no substantive deformity, and yet this mere aspect of all pervading whiteness makes him more strangely hideous than the ugliest abortion. Why should this be so?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nor in quite other aspects does nature in her least palpable but not the less malicious agencies fail to enlist among her forces this crowning attribute of the terrible.
Right.
So it's really complicated. It's not one that I feel like I read with enough depth to really parse. But it does talk about whiteness symbolically and, you know, again, like how in society we use it in a way that symbolizes like purity and goodness and all of this stuff, but also it is horrible and terrifying, you know, in other respects and in nature in particular.
Right. The absence of color in nature, he was saying like animals makes them like incredibly terrifying, or at least that's like the metaphor going. And it is like, you know, I think we have a tendency to view that term whiteness as the way we use it now, but like, you know, that's, I mean, it is somewhat, but I mean, like, it's clearly
in
not what
here.
he was talking about.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's something of that in here. There is like some discussion of race throughout this book. Like we see it
Right.
later on as well.
Well,
We
I mean,
see it in
this-
the beginning with Queequeg.
Right.
But it's like a really beautifully written and interesting chapter. And that quote in particular did feel like it just does signal like, oh, this is an important thing that this book wants to talk about to me. So, and this was like a longer chapter. Like this book is made up of many, many short chapters, but this was one of the longer ones.
We get through like the Bible references and stuff like that, but and then we get like the whale history. Like we get a lot of chapters of the whale history. I always said like there's like by page 220 or so in my version here, I was just like, okay, all this whale history and like on chapter 55 on page 219 of the monstrous pictures of whales. So like we've had chapter after chapter of basically Ishmael, if we want to argue it's Ishmael, narrated basically saying like, you know, we didn't really have a good anatomy depiction of the whale until just a few years ago because all these kind of stuffy academic types never actually go onto a whale boat. They just see the bones and then like make it up basically, like the drawings and stuff in textbooks. And, you know, and he was talking about which ones were good, which ones weren't, which were the most accurate.
I'm
And
not even
after
sure that it is Ishmael because, I mean, I'm just
Right.
thinking about chapter 42 at the whiteness of the whale. That's one we see. But thou sayest, methinks this white-led chapter about whiteness is but a white flag hung from a craven soul. Thou surrenderest to a hypo, Ishmael. But I don't know if he's saying so maybe I'm actually misreading this. Hang on.
It definitely sounds like we're projecting contemporary versions onto it,
Yeah,
which I
I
think is
don't
what
know.
people do. Like, that's what I mean. So that's why I just said, like, yeah, using the word as whiteness as we use it today. Did not necessarily, and then there's overlap. You could argue there's overlap, but I mean, again, keep in mind, this was like almost 200 years ago. They were not thinking in terms of critical theory like we are now. Like
Yeah,
kind
no,
of
but
stuff.
I'm going to
Yeah.
ask a dumb question right now. Do you think where he says this in chapter 42, it's just like right before the end of chapter 42? But thou sayest, methinks this white-led chapter about whiteness is but a white flag hung out from a craven soul. Thou surrenderest to a hypo Ishmael. Is that Ishmael talking to himself, or is that a narrator talking to Ishmael?
Probably Ishmael talking to himself, I would assume.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
I mean, we could claim it's something else, but I think it's just...
No, I think that's like the easy way to read it. Again,
It would take more work, to be like,
Yeah,
well, technically it's his subconscious talking.
No,
like,
no,
it's
no,
like,
no,
all
no.
right, yeah, I don't
I
know.
didn't even mean it like that. Like, I think I just sort of read it stupidly for a minute, but
But my thing with, like, the whale anatomy, we have a lot of sections. There's just, like, this middle section of the book around page 200 or so. We just start getting a lot of whale anatomy, boat anatomy, a lot of the processing of the whales and stuff. After they catch the first one, you start learning about the processing once they bring it on board. Or not even on board, they tie it to the side. So you have this 2-ton animal just, like, hanging to the side of this fucking wooden boat in 1850 or whatever. 1851, I guess, was when this was published.
yeah.
But my question was, the pacing kind of gets thrown off right there because we have about 50 to 100 pages of like just educational kind of material, and I was just thinking, like, what do is that needed? What does it do for the story? So, like, what are the whale and ship kind of facts, explanations do for the story? What do we think? Is it needed?
I mean,
If we took that out, would we lose something?
I think we would lose some of like the meditations on whaling and on the way we use whales, what it means to be a whaler. But yeah, I don't know. I was kind of worn out by those chapters. And I don't think they're like intensely uninteresting or anything like that. It's not that. But you do like, you get this sort of it's like, well, days, weeks, months passing, and you kind of maybe lose a little bit of sight of that as these chapters are rolling on, and you're just sort of getting this information.
And there's like a lot of like, philosophy of fish compared to men, humans kind of, or like, humans. They say men because, again, it's 1851, but we all know that means human beings, really. And I that kind of started to grate on me a little bit too, because they're comparing, the mightiness of the white whale to like the feeble humans that are trying to hunt it, kind of thing, and like the philosophy behind killing that, right, and like taking it and melting it down for oil. Not that like, of course, that probably has a place, and maybe I'm just like not giving it
Sure,
a fair
but
read as I should, but
it's so thorough, and I think there are ways in which it's interesting, but as somebody who wants to like casually read a book, that can't just be read casually, or
Yeah, as
not
we
by
said,
me.
yeah.
I'm not that reader. Like, that is not in my, I read plenty, but like, I'm also a slow reader. I need to spend time with something like this to digest it, to feel like I'm grasping what's going on. And yeah, that's when I was like really getting worn down and like, okay, like I need something to be happening, because I'm getting kind of, this no longer feels like just a pleasurable experience to me. And I also, again, but it also depends on like what else is going on in your life. Like, if you have time to just like sit on a beach and read all of Moby Dick, and that's like all you're fucking doing, like, I'd be happy to do it. I'd probably get bored at some points, but like I would feel good about having sat there, and like I would have probably enjoyed a lot of the language. When you're like, I want a fucking story, you're gonna hit those chapters and be like, God fucking damn it, like I don't want to hear about these fucking whales.
Yeah, that's what made me think of it, because that the large section of like information, facts about whales and things comes right after kind of a pretty exciting section, couple chapters where they're chasing that first whale on the boat,
Yeah.
and like everybody, the men are in the boat like hauling the oars. There's like that, what is it, Starbuck?
Yeah.
Starbuck, who's like really funny with like what he's saying to the men, like, break your backs, boys, come on, don't you want that gold? There's some fair Spanish ladies over the horizon, pull those ropes, like type of thing, like kind of thing, like shouting at them, like, good humor, but also kind of, like crotchety boat captain kind of first mate giving orders to like these men who are exhausted, not sleeping on the boat kind of thing. But I will say, like, so that kind of threw me in the pacing wise, so I was a little irritated, be like, oh, come on, you're going to throw off this great little pace as like everything, the adventure's starting on the boat basically. But I will say, like, in Melville's defense, and I've already said I'm not a huge fan of Melville, I know, whatever, you know, send in the hate mail, patreon.com/heavyboard. But I will say that, like, the flow, the way that Melville flows from this factual information in and out of the story kind of chapters as they weave in and out, it's masterful. Like, it's a master writer, clearly.
Oh, yeah.
Like, clearly a master of the craft who is able to weave in these kind of boring factual areas with the kind of excitement of the story progressing and all that. So, you know, I'm not going to knock, you know, everybody has taste. I'm not going to knock skill. It's clearly there. And as I said, like, oh man, all these people like Melville. I was like, ah. But then again, you know, I hear Harold Bloom always talks about how much he likes Melville, but like, dude, I love Edith Wharton, and Bloom doesn't like Wharton at all. Like is very vocal about not liking Wharton, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, well, we disagree on that one. Like, you know,
Wait, who dislikes Wharton?
Bloom.
Oh, yeah, well.
He had some famous quote where he said, you know, while I can recognize the genius of people like Wharton, I think he doesn't like Dostoevsky and stuff either. He said, I can recognize the genius of writers like that. I don't have to like the books kind of things,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Like he's, yeah.
Well, I mean, I also think that's one of the things that we like about Bloom is that he's like, there's an honesty there while we also recognize, I think it's easy to recognize, like, yeah, like he's going to choose canon that while I think he gets a lot of things right in terms of like, yeah, you know, it depends on these books that he believes are going to be remembered and like have been shown to be remembered. We also recognize that he has his preferences, and I think he recognizes that too.
Right. He's not, that's what I mean. Like everybody that has like an issue with somebody stating an opinion about the canon, they're just, you know, they're little crybabies, dude. I mean, like, yeah, you're allowed to have opinions about the canon, like, and every book, you know, you're not going to like every book that's in there. That's part of it. Like, but at least recognize that we have to have a wide variety of books that aren't going to appeal to everyone or not your particular taste. But like, that's part of having a canon. Is like, you know, these are the best books of this time period that we know of. You can take them or leave them, kind of thing. I'm probably going to leave Moby Dick, but but like I said, I'm still fascinated by like the cultural impact the book has had. And I don't know how, I want to talk a little bit about how that happens at the end, but I'm ready to skip ahead to like the kind of final chase if you are.
Yeah,
like
I would just say,
419,
like,
chapter 123.
I guess we already talked about the part where, like, one of the most eventful things that happens in a while in the book doesn't happen until chapter 78, and that's when Tashtego falls into the whalehead, and Queequeg goes and like dives in, like basically naked, and
Yeah, like risks his life.
yeah, and like stabs holes in the whalehead and like pulls out this guy's leg, and then he's like, oh no, I'm gonna like fuck him up if I pull him out by his legs. So then he like goes back in and like pulls him out by his head and like
birthing a
brings him-
baby. And
yeah, it's pretty wild. But that was like a fun chapter. So like the places where action happens, it is really fun. But yeah, let's move ahead.
And I didn't
to-
watch. I know there's been a couple different movie versions of this. I didn't watch any of them. I should have. And like, because this would be kind of a great movie
Yeah.
thing, but you'd have to cut out a lot of fat and do it a little differently than the way the book's set up, kind of thing. So I'd be interested to see. I guess listeners, leave it in the comments if you've watched any of the movie versions and which ones you think. Throw it in the comments. You know, throw it down there. We'll check it out. But I'm ready to move on. Yeah, we'll move on to like the Starbuck when he starts thinking about mutinying against Ahab.
What chapter is that?
I have chapter 124, 123 to 124, and that's like page 419 to like 422-ish in my version.
Yeah, I think it's maybe worth mentioning. I think it's before this that we have is it the Percy? What is he called? This like, I don't know. What's his fucking name?
Who?
The guy who gives the prophecy.
Oh, the guy on the island at the beginning, the old man.
The one who Ahab brings onto the ship. Like, hang on. Let me find it.
The one captain that lost his arm.
Did he lose his arm? I don't remember. It's the guy that he's gonna die later, right? But the guy who his name starts with an F.
I don't remember. Doesn't
I'll
ring
find
any
it,
bells
hang
to me. The guy that got cut in half by the rope, or the
Yeah.
he was like the young little boy that like banged the tambourine.
Oh
Right.
no, not him. The guy that fuck, hang on, let me find his name.
Yeah, dude, we're very well read. Listeners. Like, this is
There are a fucking shitload of characters to
there's a fuckload of characters, and they all have kind of unusual names. Some of them are like, you know, kind of New England style names, and then other ones, because it is such an eclectic group of people that did this, you know, you have island names in different languages and things like that that are hard for me to pronounce and read type things. So, you know, he did try to be accurate, I guess, in that regard. Is accurate, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some expert on, like, you know, 19th century whaling that could be like, well, actually, Melville didn't know enough, and maybe that's true, but... You know, it's a fucking story, all right?
Yeah,
Like a
okay,
piece
so-
of fiction. Like,
So they call him the Parsi, right? He's like, you know, some Indian descent and described as, I think they describe him as Asian. Fedallah.
I don't even remember that character, but yeah.
Well, he's the one that was like, something about like seeing 2 coffins or 2 caskets. He's the one who basically tells Ahab that he predicts he's going to die.
Right. I don't remember that at all. Damn.
Hang on, let's do a quick search here. Let's ask
Quick
the internet.
search.
Let's ask the internet.
Go on Wikipedia. Have
Okay,
some autistic
so
boy explain it to us. Yeah.
Fedallah's prophecy. Yeah, Fedallah also tells him that Fedallah, will die before Ahab and that only Hemp can kill the captain. Ahab takes the latter prophecy to mean that he will be hanged and again thinks his death unlikely to happen at sea. Yeah, I don't remember. I think it happens maybe chapter 117. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Take another pledge, old man. Hang on. Is it sooner?
Nah, dude, it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
matter,
yeah.
dude.
Yeah, he talks about hearses. This is
When they have to build Queequeg's coffin.
yeah.
Because Queequeg gets sick and they have to build a coffin for him on the boat because they're just going to let him float into the ocean. or
Yeah, this
something.
is when they're listening and they think they hear the sounds of like sirens or something or people dying at sea.
The mermaids, yes.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
siren sound, yes.
Yeah,
that is
sound
cool.
like the moaning in squadrons over asphaltites.
Yeah.
Whatever, of unforgiving ghosts of Gomorrah ran shuddering through the air. Started from his slumbers, Ahab face to face saw the Parsi, and hooped round by the gloom of the night they seemed the last men in a flooded world. I have dreamed it again, said he, of the hearses. Have I not said, old man, that neither hearse nor coffin can be thine? And who are hearsed that die on the sea? But I said, old man, that ere thou couldst die on this voyage, 2 hearses must verily be seen by thee on the sea, the first not made by mortal hands, and the visible wood of the last one must be grown in America. He said, hemp only can kill thee, the gallows ye mean, so he thinks that he's going to be hanged. Yeah, so that's like chapter 117, the Whale Watch, where like we get this essentially this prophecy that they're both gonna die. And then we come to like this final, like a few chapters later, we start getting to this final pursuit of Moby
Yeah.
Dick.
I want to talk about the mutiny and
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
especially the stuff between Starbuck and Stubb, the 2 first mates
Yeah.
on the boat. when they start getting the idea to like mutiny, I just, clearly Melville was inspired by Shakespeare. We've already mentioned that. I mean, all the writers, every fucking writer is inspired by Shakespeare, okay? But like, I did get like very Hamlet vibes at the end of chapter 123 when Starbuck, Ahab had threatened Starbuck with the pistol.
Yeah.
Because he was like questioning him or whatever, and then he just like those last couple paragraphs, like just that kind of like, I kept thinking of that Hamlet scene with the knife, like, is that a dagger I spy, kind of his like famous long soliloquy in Hamlet there, about the dagger. Same thing, right? He's like, he would have shot me once, he murmured. Yes, there's the very musket that he pointed at me, that one with the studded stock. Let me touch it, lift it. Strange that I, who have handled so many deadly lances, strange that I should shake so now. Loaded? I must see. Aye, and powder in the pan. That's not good. Best spill it? Wait, I'll cure myself of this. I'll hold the musket boldly while I think. I come to report a fair wind to him, but how fair? Fair for death and doom? That's fair for Moby Dick. It's a fair wind that's only fair for that accursed fish, the very tube he pointed at me, the very one, this one, I hold it here. He would have killed me with the very thing I handle now. Like, and that goes on for a while. Like, this is a long, long paragraph of kind of solo soliloquy, very Shakespeare style, where he's meditating on like the weapon that was threatened him with, and I was just like, yeah, that's fucking great. Like, it was fucking great. I got like the Hamlet vibes there, and the mutiny kind of aspect is when the story, the most famous part, right? This is where it all starts clicking. This is the famous shit we all know about. Like, Ahab's lost his mind. He's obsessed with killing this one whale that's going to be the death of everybody on board. They're not going to make any money, and they're all going to die, essentially. So the first mates are kind of like, well, hey, man, we didn't sign up to die on this thing. Like, we signed up for that. I just thought it was great. And then you kind of get that, right? They try to mutiny. Ahab goes nuts. And then, yeah, you know how the end, right? They all end up dying going after this whale. And Ishmael's the only survivor. And he manages to float like on a barrel or something until he gets picked up by like a French ship or something, right?
Well, yeah, and they get all of these like sort of fucked up omens, right? They meet the Rachel, right? All these fucking boats that have these like really regular names. And that was like, to me, that was like an eventful chapter.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I thought that one sort of
Dude,
hurt.
like the last 60 pages or so of this novel is just boom, boom, boom. Like, it's just start lightning. Like, the pace just accelerates, and you get that final chase. You get the sailors trying to mutiny. You get everybody kind of being unsure, but listening to the captain anyway, because that's like the chain of command type thing. And like, yeah, and then you get the kind of full circle with the Job quote at the end of at the beginning of the epilogue, right? Because Ishmael's the only survivor. The entire ship is destroyed by the whale. They lost all the oil they spent years collecting on this voyage, and they lost it, I think in like the Indian Ocean, right? Is where they were at that time. They like followed it down there when they were like supposed to be headed back instead, and everybody dies. And this is where the Job thing comes in. It starts with a quote from the book of Job. So, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Right.
Yeah.
We get this kind of, like the kind of what you would call a Christian allegory or some type of tale in that regard, or at least allusions to it, right?
Yeah.
But that is, the big thing with the cult. And this is why I like that, like, this is what's great about books, right? I mean, like, it becomes a certain thing in a book, a certain line, a certain character, a scene becomes so famous that it just becomes absorbed into the culture to the point where most people don't even know where it comes from, right?
Yeah.
The white whale. Well, that's my white whale. Fucking MasterChef episode. Like, and they're mentioning it on fucking
That's the thing that
reality
makes
TV.
me crazy that I choose.
Right, exactly. Like, this is the power. When people say literature is powerful, it's like, yes, it is. Like that. But like, this is what they're talking about. Maybe like it's this cultural kind of influence that it does to people. It opens your eyes not just to like other perspectives and stuff like that, which is a huge important part of books, but like it also changes the culture, like ever so subtly, even if it takes 100 years, right? Because Moby Dick was panned when it first came out. It wasn't considered a great novel. It didn't sell a lot of copies compared to some of his other books, and it was considered a failure.
That's, yeah. I mean, the last scenes are. I mean, really, not even just the last scenes, but like the scenes from when they encounter this other ship, like when, this other ship has gone off chasing the white whale, and they're sitting there waiting for this ship to come back. And they find out that, those were the voices that they had heard the last night. Like, no, we know that the people that are from your ship are the people that drowned. And this guy's son is on the ship. Two other sons of captains or something, or people on that ship are also on the ship that went down chasing Moby Dick. And it's just like kind of fucked up and heart-wrenching. And then after that, like, it continues to be, right, like, it's Fedula, or the Parsi, I think, that he's the one who dies on the line, right? Like, he's tangled up in the rope that's wrapped around Moby Dick. He gets tangled in the
line and gets pulled out of the boat, and then gets caught up in one of the other boats lines as they crisscross, and basically just gets pulled in half. Like, just the boats go right through him.
And then, like, I guess, like, Moby comes up underneath their boat and, like, breaks it in half, basically, right?
I guess if you don't know this, I mean, it's a trope in some movies and stuff like that. Like, I'm not a big sailor, even though I grew up, near the Chesapeake Bay and shit. There I knew people that were, but, like, you can easily lose a hand or something like that when a rope catches and you're in the wrong spot, and that rope comes loose from a hold, and then it just, the weight of the boat, the force of the sail swinging around could easily just sever your hand. Like, it's just so tense, like so much power and pressure on that thing. So when a 2-ton whale starts pulling a line of a harpoon that's dragged into it, and then you get caught up in it, I mean, it's not going to stop unless you cut the line, right? Like, fast enough to the point where it wouldn't take off your leg or cut you around the middle in half into 2 pieces type thing. So it is very gruesome, it's a very dangerous thing to do. Even today, right, if you ever watch, like, Deadliest Catch type shit, you see stuff like that happen. If somebody gets caught up in the line, and then they're fucking lose their foot, like, because it just, like, took their foot off, because, like, nothing's stopping the power of nature type thing, I guess, right? Like,
yeah, and, like, Ahab's leg, his wooden leg, snaps off. Right?
I like that. Well, it's made of whale bone. It's made out of a whale rib bone, and when it snaps off, it becomes more of a weapon type thing.
Yeah.
And he can't walk because he's missing his fucking leg, and he's an old man anyway, right? So, like, he has to be carried, and he's, like, ordering these people to carry him into these, like, small skiffs off the main boat to go after the white whale, and it's, it's very intense. Like, it was a good little ending to that, I thought. And I guess it's symbolic, like you would say, somebody like Bloom would say, of, like, Ishmael floating by himself in the water for days until, like, a French boat comes and picks him up or something, or a Dutch boat. And they're like, whoa, like, what happened? And he's the only one to tell a tale, like the Book of Job, right? Big thing of the whale. So no doubt Melville was using that pretty deliberately. I mean, that's all well known. We're not telling you anything new if you're into books.
Did they get pulled onto another ship? Is that what happens here?
No.
I don't fucking remember.
What do you mean, at the end? Or?
Yeah.
No. There is another ship that comes by where they find the captain lost his arm, and that's when Ahab gets really obsessed and is like, did the white whale take it? Did the white whale, you saw it? Like, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
But whenever they come across the ship, they explain in the book that it was customary for, like, a crew of people, maybe one of the first mates or the captains, to row out and like board the ship and have a talk, kind of like, what did you see? What are your maps looking like? Kind of thing. And that's different, countries too. So, like, you'd have a translator that could speak, like, Dutch or something to a Dutch ship, and then Spanish to a Spanish ship, and French ship, so on and so forth, kind of thing. English to the English-speaking ones. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's the Rachel that picks up Ishmael at the end, right?
I don't remember.
I think so.
I'm sure they say it in this last chapter. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did not look at any of the explanatory notes. I probably should have. That would have been helpful. Yeah, it's the Rachel.
Yeah. And that Rachel's important because it was like a bunch of people were lost and they were like searching for sailors or something that were lost.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, that's the end of it right there. I just had a few things left about that Bloom thing if you just want to chat about it. Like, you know, Bloom calls Melville one of the best American writers ever. What do we think? You know, he's not alone in that. A lot
I
of
don't
people
think he's wrong.
that.
I mean, this is the only Melville I've read, so, you know, I can understand why a book like this would be, you know, among Bloom's favorites. I can see, you know, why he finds it in some relationship to Whitman.
Well, that, and the reason he says it with that in that lecture, if anybody's interested to watch it, where he says that he does compare it to Leaves of Grass with Whitman because the books came out very similar time periods to each other. They were contemporaries. But he says Bloom's theory on this, at least, is it represents the shift that was happening in American culture at the time. So if you don't know your history, right, we talked about this a little bit with Leaves of Grass episode 12, available on patreon.com/heavyboard, where we go over Whitman's famous book, Leaves of Grass, because it is this, like, this was the lead up to the Civil War. There was a change in the country. The abolitionist movement was growing, right? Like, it was much, you know, it was small, but it was growing, and the sentiment was happening in order to abolish, you know, slavery and certain things like that. Like, we were becoming what you would call, you know, more liberal, or, you know, a more perfect union, or whatever you want to call it, type thing. So there was this kind of like shift in the culture, and Bloom says that Melville and Whitman and some other writers in that period were the big representatives of this new kind of thought that was coming off, you know, more equal, more, you know, getting rid of what we look at as horrific practices, right, like slavery and stuff today. So I think that's why he compares it to Leaves of Grass. At least that's what he says, is that it represents this big shift that was happening leading up to the Civil War, and then after, kind of, in America, that, you know, changed the landscape of the culture forever, kind of thing. But yeah. And then this is just the last thing with when he says it's a prose poem, not a novel. What do we think of that?
I mean, it makes sense why. I mean, there are some really, like, just passages that are just, I mean, like, in terms of how they sound, really beautiful. I mean, when the chapter where they meet the Rachel, right? Soon the two ships diverged their wakes, and long as the strange vessel was in view, she was seen to yaw hither and thither at every dark spot, however small, on the sea. This way and that her yards were swung round, starboard and larboard. She continued to tack. Now she beat against a head sea, and again it pushed her before it, while all the while her masts and yards were thickly clustered with men, as 3 tall cherry trees when the boys are cherrying among the boughs. But by her still halting the course and winding, woeful way, you plainly saw that this ship that so wept with spray still remained without comfort. She was Rachel, weeping for her children because they were not. And, you know, I'm no kind of voice actor, and I'm not Bloom, and I'm not going to read it as well as him. There is an audiobook version of this that I listened to a little bit of that's really well voice acted. Like, it's really well done. So if you're looking at options for that, if, like, you need help getting through this, I would recommend, I think it's the Audible version. Let me check.
I'm sure there's a bunch of them on YouTube,
there
too.
are a bunch of them, but honestly, like, I decided to go with this one because it was so good. Naxos Audiobooks Complete Classics Unabridged. I think it was done pretty recently. If you subscribe to Audible, I think, like, you can listen to it for free for like a month or something like that.
Yeah, you can also get our podcast on there, listeners, I believe.
Yeah.
So if you're an Audible user, we're on there. But my thing with this is, I guess he's right to some extent. I think we use poetry to describe other things a little too liberally. Granted, I'm taking into consideration this is Harold Bloom using it, so it's not like he's just using it willy-nilly here. Like, oh, it's like poetry, and it's like he's being serious about it.
Narrated
not
by
just-
William Hootkins. That's the narrator that I think is the best one.
Okay.
But
yeah, so I don't know if I'd go as far as saying, oh, it's a prose novel or it's a prose poem. and
No,
not a
I
novel.
wouldn't.
It definitely blurs the line.
It definitely
so I
plays with
wouldn't-
genre, but I would still
Yeah.
call it a novel.
Right, because it is using the novel form, although it's using a lot of different forms, and this is where I got to like kind of, but yeah, like I said, Bloom doesn't like Wharton, and I think Wharton is fucking great, so we'll just disagree on things like that. But this is where I got like the kind of Joyce vibes, and I'm doing it backwards, right? Obviously, Joyce was inspired by Melville, not the other way around, but I was definitely getting that. Like, no doubt, Joyce loved Melville and like thought it was great. Read it when he was a kid and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot about it that feels really genre bending in moments. Maybe
Especially
not the
Ulysses.
way you would see in the contemporary moment.
yeah,
But-
especially Ulysses. When I read Ulysses and then read this, like I said, I kind of did it in reverse order because clearly Moby Dick influenced Ulysses. But when I read that, I was just in a very similar vibe. Like, no doubt, Joyce was
Yeah,
like
and I would
using
say
Moby Dick
Ulysses
as a
is
guide.
probably. I haven't read it, but from what little I know of it, seems more experimental in its prose.
It is, yeah, it is. But it's this is very similar vibes I got reading the books, and so
This
close to each other,
feels-
months apart, like this. So
Not necessarily epic in the way that you would think about Homer, but it does feel like this grand, like epic.
right, that's what it was. It was
story
trying to be, and no
that-
doubt using that, right? Like it was using Shakespeare, Homer, like no doubt Melville was reading all of that and loving it.
And like wants to pull in all of like this historical information in a way that's like really sort of put straightforwardly to the reader. Like there's
And
just chapters of it.
I was curious, and I know there's like a bunch of theories about this. What you thought of it in terms of how did this book become so popular? Because it was panned by critics when it came out. It was a flop commercially. It didn't sell copies. I think he had to no American press would publish it. I think he had to get it published through like a British press at first. And I'm just like, so how did this become such a huge cultural touchstone? Was it academia? Like, was it like academics studying it years later that kind of brought it up from the dead kind of thing? Or how does that happen? Or how do we think? Or
Yeah, I mean, like, I think obviously, we don't know because we didn't do that research, unless you did, in which case, please do tell me.
I didn't, but I mean, I think if I did try to do that research, it would be futile. Like, I don't know if I'd get an exact answer.
No, I don't
It
know.
would
if you
just be a
can.
theory, an educated theory on how maybe, because I've heard things like Great Gatsby famously was not a big hit when it came out, but now that's a huge cultural touchstone. And there's a lot of theories on that. There's like, oh, it could be academia that like suddenly realized its merits, and held it up a couple, 10, 15, 20 years later.
I mean,
But I've heard another story about Great Gatsby where it's like one of the reasons it got big was because in World War II, when they were handing out free paperbacks to American soldiers, they were handing out these kind of like double books in one type thing. So they printed like Great Gatsby and like some other novel together and would hand it out to the soldiers as like a book to read while they're sitting around type thing. And there's theories that helped revive it, because then every soldier had read Great Gatsby by that point, because you're just sitting around those foxholes, right? Like not knowing what to do and just read a book, smoke, until 15, 20 minutes of sheer terror happens and you got to kill people.
so my guess would be is that in retrospect, we look at this novel as like this, like a portrait of a piece of American culture and history that we otherwise might, not hang on to, and like, you know, there, I don't know how many books there are about, you know, whaling communities in the US.
No idea.
But
Probably not many. Yeah.
it seems, well, first of all, like, there's the obsession thing, right? You know, of chasing something to madness, to death,
Right.
which I think is probably something that holds well in literature. Like, I mean, it does have like this Shakespearean almost like sense of importance of like this almost tragic character who isn't quite, I wouldn't maybe describe him quite as tragic, because we don't, Ahab isn't really our Hamlet, right? Like, he's not our main guy. But I think it's there. I think there's, let's look. But yeah, I would say probably like it's just this really intricate view at and attempt to explain this piece of American history and culture. According to Vanity Fair, instead of being a page-turner, Moby Dick is a repository of American history and culture and the essentials of Western literature. According to some shitty website called History Hit. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't care, dude. Yeah.
But yeah,
like I said, it's all theories. It's all, we don't know exactly. I mean, I guess the most logical, easiest, right, Occam's razor explanation
Melville's
is,
lifetime only sold 3,000 copies.
right, is academics kind of revived its importance later on, you know, after Melville's death. And then it just became part of the canon and all
Yeah,
that.
okay,
And I guess
so-
the rest is history. That would make the most sense to me, like the simplest kind of explanation.
Critics and scholars began to rediscover his work later on
Right.
in
yeah.
1919 and
Yeah, so
declared
way
it
after,
as like a fine work
Right.
and one of the finest. So yeah, it was
That-
something that happened in retrospect
Always is, man.
by people who already were interested in Melville.
Yeah, always is.
Well, big fat whale. Big ugly fat albino whale.
The sperm whale, yeah. I guess
Dude,
you
when
could
he was
make a bunch of sperm
describing the
innuendos.
sloshing of like Tashtego or whatever falling into the whale head, it's fucking disgusting. Like, that repulsed me.
Yeah.
I was
And
like,
how
ugh,
covered
the
in
smell.
oil and fat you're in, yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
describing the smell.
Well, that was funny too. Is like there were people on the boat whose job it was to just like hang out on the whale that's hanging off the fucking boat all night and beat the sharks away. So they don't
Oh
eat
my
the
God,
whale.
yeah.
Like,
Well, and
that's just a job you could have.
There was also that
but,
crazy part toward the end where, like, every time they stuck an oar in the water, they had sharks, like, fucking biting at them. And I was like, oh,
Oh,
my
right,
God. Like,
yeah.
and that was, like, there were so many, you know, bad omen moments.
blood
this
in the
book.
water. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy to have read it. I feel like this is one that I'd be interested to revisit later on and, like, try to read again. At a
That's why
moment
I
where
think,
I'm not
yeah.
crazy busy and, like, overloaded with work.
That's what I thought too when I got to the end of this. I was like, you know, I really didn't enjoy this book like I thought I might, but maybe this is one of the reasons we encourage you to buy a cheap copy, listeners, is because then you keep it on your shelf 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, you pick it up and you can be like, you know, I have a completely different perspective on this now. Like, you know, I like it better, I like it worse, whatever it is. Yeah, I could confirmed what I thought 10 years ago, you know, maybe that could be the case, but usually it'll be different. So that's why you want to buy a book. Support fucking presses and buy books, like, and keep them on your shelf
You know,
and read them over and over again throughout your life.
and it
then-
can feel intimidating too, because it's like, it's not like a super easy read, but it can be fun in moments. Like, you know, give it a try. Take your time with it. Don't feel defeated by it, as I at turns did. because I did. I got really mad. I was pissed at myself. I was going back, asking myself if I understood moments. Like, I mean, I'm sure I asked like several really dumb questions while we were having this conversation. So, you know, that's just part of the reading game, especially if like your job isn't to know Moby Dick cover to cover and like know all the Western literature tropes and all the history of whaling. Like, you know, you're gonna have to take some time with it, and it can be worth it.
It's always worth it. Yeah, it's always worth it. Now we can say we read Moby Dick, which I know a lot of listeners probably can't say they've done that, have you? Or you could just lie about it.
Yeah,
right?
you
That's
know,
always
if you
a
gotta
fun-
skip a chapter, like
You pretend. Yeah. Just pretend. Yeah. Pretending can get you pretty far in the literary world, I'll tell you that much. All right, we done here?
yeah, man,
Yeah, I'm bored as shit.
that's what we
All
do.
right. Reminder, if you made it this far, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/heavyboard. If you don't want to pay for Patreon, you just want to support us in other ways, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and share it, leave a 5-star review. That helps us out, helps us grow, helps us get a bigger community going. And another reminder, we're looking for workshop horror stories. Send in your workshop horror stories to heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. And next week, we are doing Heather Chrisley's The Trees, the Trees. Did I say her name right?
Heather Crystal,
Crystal?
what'd you say?
I said Chrisley.
I think it's, I don't know. I've been saying Crystal. We should
Crystal,
probably look that up.
Chrisley.
It's one of those.
Whatever.
We hope.
Crystal.
Chrisley.
I said Chrisley, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
But the book's called The Trees, the Trees. It's a little slim one. It'll be a good little poetry one. So we'll go back to poetry here as we've been doing. Join us for that one. This has been Heavy Board. See ya.
Man. God. Piece of shit. Feel like a big fat piece of shit. Big fat whale.
Heavy.
bored,
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say the male is entirely hostile. No! You know,
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored,
Some activities are intentional, right?
it shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.